Hi, everybody. I'm Neil Stobart. I'm the VP of System Engineering at Cloudian. And today I want to talk to you about ransomware and how potentially you can help lock that risk out of your data center with the Cloudian HyperStore solution. So I just wanted to take a little time to talk about what ransomware actually is and what the real impact and the risks to you are. Now, looking at the World Economic Forum from 2019, they actually rated in the top 5 risks of likelihood of happening both this massive incident of data fraud, theft, and large scale cyber attacks. And certainly ransomware sits in both of those. So certainly ransomware is a type of ransom, blackmail, however you want to call it, where a hacker or somebody takes gains access to your systems and essentially locks your data away from you. So certainly that can be considered data fraud. Maybe not necessarily theft. Probably that's when they take it and use it elsewhere, but that's not what ransomware is about. And of course, on the large scale cyber attacks side, as we look starting below the new reality I've got there, we've got global ransomware attacks in 2018 at 204 million, and that's continuing to grow all the time. So right now, I think we look at, or 2018, 2019, ransomware attacks were happening every 14 seconds, but that's expected to increase to 11 seconds by 2021. And just again, there's more and more criminal organizations and individuals looking at a way of making money in this way. There's 1.5 million new phishing sites created every month. And then looking at the impact, the actual business and financial impact to organizations, 34% of businesses hit with malware took a week or more to regain access to data. So essentially, data is the lifeblood of an organization. Your applications can't work if you don't have access to your data. Your people can't work. It's really a critical piece of your business infrastructure. However you want to look at it. An average ransomware attack costs $133,000, really down to loss of access to your IT systems, loss of being able to do your typical, daily work, job, deliver your service or your products. And then of those organizations that had been attacked by ransomware, 51% opted to pay the ransom. Out of that 51%, 22% never actually got access to their data, even though they did pay the money. So this is a very difficult situation where someone's holding you to ransom. You have no idea who it is. You have no idea where they are. Who do you call? Do you call your local police, your national police? What jurisdiction would they have over an individual that literally could be located anywhere in the world? How do you find these people? So there's no recourse, even if you do pay money, whether you get the actual data back. So there's some significant, financial and business impact to, a ransomware attack. So let's just talk about what ransomware is. So this definition's fairly widely accepted. Ransomware is a type of malware that prevents you from using your computer or accessing certain files unless you pay a ransom. Typically, it encrypts your files so that they can't be opened. And when I say can't be opened, be opened by yourselves. So the first notification that you'll get that you're being held to ransom is something like this, a pop-up, or even the hacker leaving little files in your folders where they've encrypted data. And basically what they're asking for is for you to send some money either to an email address, and usually using some sort of cryptocurrency that is untraceable. So it is the fastest growing malware threat, and it targets users of all types, not just specific industry verticals. It literally could be anybody. So I'll just take a couple of examples here. In Atlanta, the local government there had to spend 2.6 million to recover from a 52,000 demand ransomware scare. And when you start to look at those costs, do I pay $52,000? Or do I have to spend 2.6 million to recover? And obviously the financial numbers stack up that you should pay the ransom there, but what's the guarantee you're going to get that data back? The Samsung ransomware attack cost 1.5 million to the Colorado Department of Transport. And then more famously, TravelX, worldwide money exchange organization, they were held to ransom for $6 million. And then even in the UK, last couple of years, we had the WannaCry malware attack, and that took out, an NHS organization. And especially in these days where healthcare and transport and logistics are increasingly important, it's not just a financial risk, it's also a social risk right across the board. So how do we actually get impacted by ransomware? So hackers and these criminal organizations are taking much more sophisticated measures to try and breach your security defenses, to then gain access to your data, to then lock it and then control and then essentially demand payment from you. So the most common attacks come from phishing emails, social engineering, exploit kits, and typically it's the exploit kits that both the social engineering and the phishing emails are trying to deliver into your infrastructure. So with phishing, you've probably everybody's seen one of these. It's an email that purports to be from a reputable organization, and it's delivering an attachment or a URL, encouraging the recipient to click on or deliver, go to the URL, go to the website, in the hope that when they open that URL or attachment, that there will be malware installed on the recipient's machine. Social engineering is slightly different. We've got hackers trawling all of the social media sites, Facebook and Instagram and the like, looking for information on targeted individuals, and probably targeted individuals that has a role in an organization that they think could be worthwhile trying to attack. And essentially they're trying to work out username, password, so they can mimic that user logging into the environment. And then, of course, you've got the direct attacks, seeking vulnerability in your networks, attacking insecure servers and networks, exploiting operating system, SMB. We have the SMB exploits. That's the way that Windows shares files. So exploiting any vulnerability in the environment. So you can take steps to try and prevent a lot of this. A lot of it is to do with education for the end user. But also, we look at putting in network security, virus scanning to try and detect malware when it actually does hit. But at the point of victim infection, and I think there's becoming a recognition now that it's not a case of if you get infected, but it's a case of when you get affected. There's that many attacks taking place. And like I say, the hackers are getting more and more sophisticated all the time. So once you've been infected, how does that malware spread? So it's going to go through your network. It's going to look at all your different accounts, user accounts, admin accounts, and try and exploit any further information it can get so it can distribute across your infrastructure as widely as possible. Once it's got, let's say, a target that they think is useful, what it does is then triggers a communication out to the malware developers' servers, what they call their command and control or C2 servers, receives an encryption key, which it then starts to lock all your data. And the actual process of encrypting data occurs very quickly, from breach to starting encryption, and that could be within seconds, within 3 seconds, I think, is some stats that I've read up on. And it doesn't have to encrypt the whole data file. If you had a 1 gigabyte file, all it has to do is encrypt the first few bytes so that that file is unrecoverable. So it can spread very, very quickly. The other thing I kind of want to talk about is how that attack is brought into your environment and what that blast zone would be. So I think if you had a compromised end user, so just one of your people that has restricted access to use certain applications and see certain data sets, certain data sets. Typically, they won't have administrative privileges through your network, so they're only going to affect what they can actually see. So it's a relatively low blast zone. But if that user is an admin user who has admin access to larger amounts of data sets, larger amounts of applications, has the privileges to be able to change data, has the privilege to delete data on a wide scale across your infrastructure, well, that could be serious. And the blast zone is much wider. Now, let's take the example of a rogue employee. This is somebody that potentially could be an admin as well, and for whatever reason isn't happy. Or it might be that they've been approached by a criminal organization and paid money to deliver malware into your environment. In that case, that rogue employee actually knows or potentially knows everything and all the passwords and could cause a great deal of damage. And then finally, the most sort of common viewed hacking attempts is from that remote agent, network penetration, always probing OS and networking device vulnerabilities, trying to gain access and install the malware, through one of these vulnerabilities. So what can you do about that? What's the defense? Well, first off, you're going to look at secure networking, with using devices like firewalls, solutions to look at intrusion detection, all of those sort of network security solutions. You can have detection tools, so virus scanners, web and mail scanning protection, not just at the endpoint, at the user endpoint, but we also need to look at both server and storage, all the enterprise platforms. So they'll give you a warning if a malware that it recognizes is put into your environment, it will warn, it will find it, it will quarantine it, and stop that distribution. Now the problem with the scanning tools is that they're only as good as their database. If there's a new malware that is introduced, something like WannaCry, it does take a little while for the signature to be detected and coded into the virus scanning databases. So there is always that element of vulnerability whilst the scanners are looking to fix that. You also should have quite a secure restricted privileged accounts, especially on write permissions to data. If you can write to data, you can change data, you can delete data. So try and reduce the number of people that can actually write data, and especially across the board. Try and restrict users to be only access data that they need to actually access to do their job. You've also got to maintain and update all your software. So virus scanners we talked about, operating systems, applications, storage, network devices. At some point, vulnerabilities can be found. So it's always key to keep up to date, and all of those on that side of the house. Employee education, I think everybody will kind of be aware of and probably has done at some point, but it's always important to stay up to date with new ways that the hackers are targeting individuals and organizations, and keep your users educated and make sure that they're equipped with the tools to protect their environment and what they can get access to. And really the last resort is having your regular backups, and this is an area we're going to dive into much more. So if you have your primary data set that's been encrypted, typically you're going to have to then go back to backup. Now the possibility is the backup could be encrypted as well, because regular backups are typically stored on file systems. So it's always been thought of as using tape storage for backups as the most effective protection against modification, tampering, encryption, whatever you want to call it. Because tape, There's a unique format to how that data is written to that media versus a lot of the other ways that we protect our data. So it's typically an offline media. It's typically blocked. Only the backup application has access to it. Once the tape is taken out of a tape drive or the tape library, you can't tamper with that. The problem with tape is that it is offline. It has a high, recovery time objective. It takes a long time to recover data from tape, especially if it's large amounts of data. Tape media isn't really appropriate for long-term archives. Really, a tape media has a shelf life of about 7 years, and only then, if you've actually tended to it, wound the data, read data back, you have a problem called bit rot, which the magnetic tape, can degrade as well, especially with age. And also tape, managing tape media and tape storage, it has a high total cost of ownership. There's a lot of manual intervention, people moving data and tape media around, maybe moving it off-site. You've got to keep track of where everything is. And then when you do want to recover any data, you have to have somebody be able to access the systems and physically put that tape back into place. So for many reasons, many organizations have been moving away from tape, mainly, for what I've just talked about. So alternatives have been, replicated virtual machines, augmenting backup with primary storage snapshots. So you've got more recovery points, so you can get a better recovery point objective. And also, a lot of people have been writing data backups to disk, which are typically stored on a file system. And disk is preferred to tape. One, it's quicker to write, but it's a lot quicker to read because you've got your random access, versus a sequential tape access. So therefore, you can recover your data much more flexibly and just basically a lot quicker. So just look at how that attack takes place. So we talked about you've got an infection. What that malware kit will do is it'll scan all the data drives it can find and look for files to encrypt. So in your primary data platform, that's probably storing virtual machines. So that's in a file system. There's your regular file shares, your user and your departmental organizational file shares. And of course, all your applications have access to data as well. All that data will live in file systems, whether it's a mapped drive or a mount point in Unix from a NAS device, whether it's a local or removable drive, and that might be SAN technology or just physical disks installed on your server, all running on file systems, and even snapshots in NAS devices. That recovery data is held in file systems, just as hidden folders. So this is exactly what the malware is looking for. Anything it can gain access to file systems so they can start to encrypt it. Similarly, on the backup server side, most backups are now held in file systems. And all the backup server is doing is making a copy of the primary data and copying that in its own, file proprietary format on a file system. But if the hacker gains access to that file system, we can still encrypt that data so that you can't get access to it. And some of the more sophisticated attempts we've seen are where the backup server is targeted first before the primary data, because you're less likely to detect a problem on your backup data than your primary data. If primary data, as soon as it's impacted, you're going to realize because you can't operate normally. But backup, if that's encrypted, you're only going to look at that when you actually do a recovery. So if the hacker can attack that bit first, take out your emergency system, and then start to work on your primary data, they really then do have you in a corner. So this is what we really want to focus on, is protecting that backup file system. So really the only immunization from ransomware is implementing an immutable data system. And usually that's using technology that's described as WORM, write once, read many. And that means that once you've written the data, it cannot be changed, it can only be read. That means you can't encrypt the data. So backup to a worm storage target is really key to protecting against ransomware. So at Cloudian, we offer a storage platform that uses the S3 API for applications and users to access the data. As part of the S3 API, there's a feature called Object Lock, and that implements worm for any S3 object. What that allows you to do is block any modification to your data within a customer-defined retention period. So if you want to make sure that you have that backup data set for 7 years, you can set those particular backup objects to not be changed or deleted for 7 years. Now, the real nice thing about Object Lock is that it's not something that applies to everything. You can set, if you have an application that is also talking S3 Object Lock API, you can actually set retention at the individual object level. So where you have a grandfather, father, son type backup procedure, you can keep the dailies, just for a week. You can keep the monthlies, for a year. You can keep the yearlies for 7 years, and you can actually do that level of granularity on your different objects. Now, worm really was used in the past to meet compliance requirements. Really, immutability is all about data not changing, guaranteeing there's not changing, that we have an audit track of what that data, how that data has changed, who's changed it, and really it was being used for primary data to meet certain compliance regulations. So SEC 17A in the financial services side, FINRA, CFTC, and then obviously there's a raft of EMEA certifications. So we have had third-party validation to meet those data immutability requirements. Now, you don't want to lock your data forever, and you want to lock your data for different reasons. Compliance mode really is for when we're talking about meeting compliance with certain industry regulations. And absolutely means that data cannot be changed, and even for a root account. So once you've got that data and you've locked it, it's there for that period, unless you actually destroy the equipment that it's housed on. But governance mode is slightly different. It's intended for data protection rather than compliance. So there is the ability to have a privileged account that can go and change those data retention periods. There's also something called legal hold as well. So even when an object has reached the end of its worm compliance or governance mode, you can place that object into legal hold, and that means it can't be deleted or changed for as long as legal hold is applied, and that is really a manual on and off switch. So we're given flexibility here for compliance, for data protection, and then for the legal hold side of the house. So implementing worm in your backup environment is actually not that difficult. Obviously, you need a backup target, which we would suggest is Cloudian HyperStore that can deliver the object lock capability. And here we're just showing an example of a Veeam backup solution. So Veeam actually supports the object lock API today. And what that does is it'll send the backup data to the Cloudian storage platform. The second step, it applies the object lock, and that's in place on the storage platform. And then in step 3, we've got a malware attack, and it's trying to get access and change that data. But essentially, we're repelling it. We're saying you cannot change that data. We don't care who you are. This data is locked, and it cannot be changed. And then step 4, at some point, maybe the primary data set has been compromised. Now we can actually get to our clean copy that we've got that hasn't been infected. So really locking your data is the only true immunization for ransomware. Now, just on the Cloudian HyperStore platform, we're not just for backup. It is a big use case that we get used for in many organizations. But really, we're a storage platform that's very scalable. It's for large data sets, typically larger files. Maybe you're keeping those files for a longer period of time. Maybe they're not changing as frequently. And the performance requirements on that data is throughput versus IOPS, low latency. So we can do extremely high data transfer, but it's not a storage platform. It's not a flash platform that's designed for doing, small IOs, that might be required by online transactional databases, for example. So things like backup and archiving we talked about, NAS tiering, storage as a service, media and entertainment, big data, email archiving, healthcare, active archives. Now, where you've got applications that are dealing with data like that, you can actually use object lock for your primary data as well as your backup. So where you have media assets, for example, that data is very unlikely to change. So why not lock that anyway? And then, nobody can go and encrypt that. Nobody can change that in the future. So just to summarize, the ransomware risk is becoming greater. There's more activity all the time. And the conversation is now turning to not if I get infected, but when. Using tape storage for backups is a good strategy, but it does have a high TCO. It's not reliable for long-term data retention and is very inflexible for recovery testing. And that's why many organizations have been moving away from tape to disk-based system for backup target storage. So disk-based worm, we said, really provides an alternative to tape for that protection, and delivers all the benefits of disk over tape. An S3 object lock, which is an S3 API standard, can integrate with backup applications to provide object level retention policies. So you don't have to keep that data forever. You can control how long that data is kept, but nobody can change it. And right now, Cloudian HyperStore is the only on-prem object storage platform that can provide object lock with the S3 API spec. So appreciate your time. Thank you for listening. Happy to take any questions. And if you're interested, we have a whole raft of information on our website, cloudian.com, where you can find more information about ransomware. Thank you.